and good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be part of this workshop, at least virtually. I would prefer to be there, but anyways, in this context, I would like to share some ideas with this fantastic policy panel with Johannes and Robert. It's a real pleasure to meet you guys. We don't have much time, so I would like to discuss a specific proposal to invest in a sustainable way. And this is more important than ever because we are suffering not only from a crisis associated to the COVID-19 virus, but also a crisis related to climate change that is becoming more evident than ever. So I would like to share a proposal that tackles the two crises at the same time. But we need to change the blah, blah, blah speeches to real actions against climate change. And one of the most important contributions is not taking shorter showers or eating less meat. And don't get me wrong, that measures help. But one of the biggest contributions is moving our investments to sustainable funds. And this specific proposal is about pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. And this proposal is consistent with the IDB new development plan called Vision 2025 that has 5 priorities and including actions against climate change. So this is one of the main pillars of our new Vision 2025, which is a development plan for Latin America and the Caribbean. And now let me try to share the presentation. Okay, I don't want to waste some time, but let me start with some ideas. And the first idea that I would like to show you something. It was a cartoon that says that for a beautiful moment, we maximize shareholder value. And you can see in the cartoon that everything is destroyed. So I think this reflects the conventional wisdom of a trade-off between financial returns and sustainability. And this is related to the objective function of firms. The whole idea stated by Friedman in the 70s is that social responsibility is not in the hands of the shareholders of companies. I can start over again. So again, this is a nice cartoon that reflects this discussion that we are trying to tackle in this panel. And it says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. So, and I was saying that this reflects the conventional wisdom of this trade-off between financial returns and sustainability. And this is related to the notion of the objective function of firms. And the whole idea is stated by, I would say, this trend by Friedman in the 70s that mentioned that everything should take care outside the firm if you want to be responsible in social terms. So here's a quote from Friedman in 1970s that says, the social responsibility of managers is to make as much money as possible while conforming to the basic rules of the society, both those embodied in law and those embodied in ethical custom. So in this message is that there is no consideration about negative externalities. And this is a huge problem if we want to discuss sustainability issues. So now I think trying to answer what is the appropriate objective function for a firm, I think we have to rethink the role of businesses in society. And we have to move to this notion of that it's a big difference to consider shareholder welfare because it's not the same as maximization of market value. And companies and asset managers should pursue policies consistent with the preference of their investors. And investors, of course, have consideration in terms of the environment, in terms of the social impact, and also in terms of the governance. And that's here I'm just bringing an example by Hart and Singalia regarding how companies should maximize shareholder welfare and not only market value. And voting by shareholders on corporate policy is one way to achieve this. And there are many trends that will support this idea in terms of rethinking the role of business in society. 3 trends. One is related to SDGs, of course, and now stakeholders, including employees, customers, governments, are pressuring companies to play a more prominent role in addressing critical changes. And that's important because we're trying to talk to governments, we're trying to talk to regulators, but I think there is a key role for the private sector involvement in this regard. Second, there is a notion, and then we can discuss with you guys, and especially with Robert, this discussion regarding better investments and better returns. And investors are taking a look to this seriously in terms of trying to adapt and adopt all the practices in terms of considering climate risk into their portfolio analysis. And the third trend is about the standards. Of course, there is a huge discussion regarding the standards, but I don't want to have this as an excuse to not move to sustainable investments. So there are a lot of efforts from different companies, and probably we're going to try to find a common standard globally. For instance, IFRS is working on it as we speak. And probably we're going to have something like Basel III for capital requirement, and probably we have some standards on that regard. Now, if you consider risks, and we're trying to come up with some idea what are the most important risks in terms of likelihood and impact, here I have some information regarding the recent global risks report by the World Economic Forum, and you can see the top 10 risks in terms of likelihood and in terms of impact, and you can see that 5 of them are related to climate change. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that the perceived risks are really oriented to climate risks, and this is going to be a huge consideration for investors, but also a huge consideration for people, regular people who save money into pension funds or governments into sovereign wealth funds. And there are many recent changes towards sustainability, and here this is a list of some examples that are working in some way or another around the world. Now, the exact example that I would like to share now is a policy paper that we wrote last year regarding how to build a business case for ESG investing. So in this case, we tried to put together some data using pension funds in Chile and also using sovereign wealth funds. And what we were trying to do is to answer this question. And if I give you this question for all the audience here, I would say, would you be interested in investing in companies that produce nuclear weapons, or companies that damage the environment, pollute our seas, or violate human rights, or companies that have been related to corruption scandals? What would you say if I ask you, every one of you? Probably, and I hope so, you're going to say, no, I don't want to invest in those type of companies. Unfortunately, if your answer is no, it's likely that you are investing some way in this type of companies today. So if I give you the decision power to you guys, probably you're going to choose a different portfolio in terms of your investments. And that's an important component, to have more power associated to the consumer or the people that can save. And here I'm comparing 2 indices. I'm using the MSCI ACWI, All Country Worldwide Index, and I'm using their sister in terms of is the same index, but with ESG considerations. And if you can see, in average, the ACWI ESG leaders is a little bit higher in terms of returns. So probably you may say, okay, probably there is more risk associated to that index, and it's not the case. If we compare volatility with the regular benchmark vis-a-vis ESG benchmark, the volatility using this pair of indices in each case, you can see that the volatility is quite similar. Okay, so that's an important point. You have similar returns and similar volatility at the same time, which is a good notion in terms of building this business case. And then we have this comparison, and Robert tackled that in his presentation. Here we aggregate companies only with the benchmark and also with the ACWI ESG, and we can see that there are huge differences in terms of water consumption, in terms of greenhouse gas emission intensity, and in terms of any energy consumption. So here, yes, I would like to give you some examples regarding the differences in terms of the behavior of ESG companies and the companies that represent the complete index. So now, in trying to build this business case, we use data from the Chilean sovereign wealth funds and also from the Chilean pension funds. And here we did a counterfactual exercise. So the question is, what would have happened if we have invested in ESG companies rather than to invest in all indices? So we compare the actual returns with this counterfactual exercise, and we can see that the returns are very similar, or in this specific case, the ESG companies' returns are a little bit higher than the usual benchmark. So this is the first conclusion in terms of one of the sovereign wealth funds, which is associated to the Economic and Social Stabilization Fund. And in the case of the Pension Reserve Fund, it's more or less the same picture. The financial returns are quite similar in terms of investing in a sustainable way, rather if we invest in the complete benchmark. Now, in terms of the Chilean pension funds, is more or less the same. If you can see here we have data for Fund A, B, C, D, and E. And if you can see that in all cases, the returns associated to ESG firms are a little bit higher than the actual returns. So again, we are using the benchmark, and we compare with a smaller sample using only the ESG companies there. And we can see that the financial returns, again, are equivalent or at least a little bit higher than the usual benchmark. So given that I am on time, I would say that just to conclude is that being sustainable doesn't mean rejecting economic growth and financial well-being in any way. So this is an important message that we need to elaborate and transmit to investors. And I think this is a false dichotomy. So the proposal for a significant and immediate impact is to encourage the use of ESG funds in pension systems and sovereign funds. We have worked a lot on the debt side, issuing green bonds and other type of social bonds, but I think it's important that we also tackle the asset side of the government's balance sheet, but also we should care about how to invest our pension funds. So I will leave it here, Maurice. Thank you very much.